On what should have been the happiest day of their lives, Michael and Alana's wedding takes an unexpected and terrifying turn. A mysterious poison, a web of family secrets, and an ancient darkness lurking beneath the surface. This is a story of love, betrayal, and a relentless pursuit of truth. As Michael unravels the shocking secrets surrounding his bride's death, he finds himself caught in a battle that threatens not just his faith, but his very life. Are you ready to discover the hidden truths of Marula? Let's dive into this gripping tale and uncover what lies beneath the surface. In the heart of the spirited town of Marula, the air was thick with anticipation and joy as the town prepared for the union of Michael and Alana. Marula was known for its age-old traditions, where the lively colors of the marketplace and the aroma of freshly baked bread, spiced fruits, and floral incense marked every corner. That day, the entire town seemed to dress itself in celebration. The early morning sky painted itself a soft, flawless blue, as if nature itself were giving its blessing to the couple. Streets were lined with friends, neighbors, and even travelers who had come from afar, each eager to witness the love story of Michael and Alana unfold. The church, a grand old structure with high arched windows and a bell that tolled throughout the town, was transformed with vibrant garlands of marigold, lavender, and roses. The fragrant blend of flowers filled the air, and golden rays of sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful reflections on the stone floors. Children dressed in bright, festive clothes played around the church entrance, and adults greeted one another with hugs and laughter, sharing in the happiness of the occasion. Inside, Michael stood at the altar, dashing in his traditional wedding attire, his eyes filled with quiet determination and love as he awaited his bride. Known throughout Marula as a man of integrity and kindness, Michael had won the hearts of the town with his unwavering character and warmth. Today, he was a picture of strength and tenderness, glancing down the aisle, his heart racing with anticipation. When Alana appeared at the doors of the church, a collective gasp went through the crowd. She was radiant, draped in an ivory gown that seemed to flow like water, embroidered with delicate flowers that matched the church's blooms. Her eyes sparkled with excitement and perhaps a hint of nervousness, but when her gaze met Michael's, a calmness washed over her. Guided by her father, she moved down the aisle with grace, and every step she took seemed to be a promise to the future they were about to build together. Pastor Daniel, a figure of wisdom and compassion beloved by all, awaited them at the altar. His gentle smile and steady voice had guided many through their most challenging and joyful moments, and today he stood ready to join Michael and Alana in the sacred vows of marriage. As he welcomed everyone with warm words, the crowd settled into a quiet reverence, each person sensing the weight of the moment. The vows Michael and Alana exchanged were simple yet profound, words that spoke of loyalty, courage, and unwavering love. The couple held hands tightly, their promises weaving together a new chapter in their lives. When Pastor Daniel pronounced them husband and wife, cheers erupted throughout the church, echoing into the open sky. Michael and Alana's first kiss as a married couple was met with claps, whistles, and a shower of flower petals from the guests, symbolizing the blessings and love of all those present. Outside, the celebration spilled into the churchyard and beyond. Musicians played lively tunes that seemed to carry the spirit of Marula's heartbeat. Friends and family joined hands in dance, their laughter ringing out like bells, mingling with the music in a joyous symphony. Tables were set with Marula's finest foods, from roasted meats and seasoned vegetables to sweet pastries and spiced wine. Children darted between the tables, giggling, while the older townsfolk watched, smiling, sharing stories of past weddings and memories of their own younger days. As the sun climbed higher, casting a golden glow over the festivities, Michael and Alana mingled with their guests, embracing family, sharing laughter, and basking in the warmth of the loves surrounding them. It was a day that felt endless, a day that seemed blessed by the heavens themselves. And in every smile, every heartfelt embrace, and every dance step, there was the sense that something beautiful and enduring had just begun. As the sun reached its peak, casting a golden warmth over the festivities, the celebration of Michael and Alana's union grew even more vibrant. The laughter of friends and family rang through the air, blending with the joyous music that filled the courtyard. Alana, glowing with happiness, laughed as she danced with her new husband, her bright smile a testament to the love they had just sworn to each other. The sound of tambourines and drums echoed, and the sweet scent of spiced wine lingered in the breeze. Everything seemed perfect, as if the day was crafted from the dreams of poets and the hopes of the townsfolk. Among the guests, Alana's family gathered closely, offering their heartfelt congratulations. Her mother, Mama Lani, always graceful and dignified, stood nearby, beaming with pride at her daughter's happiness. Mama Lani's beauty had been admired by many throughout the years, a reflection of her wisdom and nurturing spirit. Next to her was Kira, Alana's younger sister, whose mischievous eyes and quick wit had kept the family laughing through countless gatherings. The bond between the three women was a deep one, founded on years of love and shared moments, and today they all stood together in celebration. As the afternoon wore on, the guests were treated to an array of delicacies, and the music grew louder, urging everyone to partake in the festivities. Alana, with Michael's hand securely in hers, continued to move through the crowd, accepting congratulations and sharing in the joy of the day. But as she spoke with her mother, Mama Lani, she noticed a sudden shift in the older woman's demeanor. There was a brief flicker in Mama Lani's eyes, an odd mixture of pride and something darker, something almost unseen. It passed quickly, but Alana felt it, like the distant shadow of a storm cloud on the horizon. "Mama, thank you for everything," Alana said, giving her mother a warm hug. "I couldn't have asked for a better day." Mama Lani smiled, but her gaze lingered, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You are my heart, my darling. Today is just the beginning, and I have something special for you, something to help guide you into this new chapter of your life." From her side, Mama Lani produced a small, ornate vial filled with a golden liquid, shimmering in the sunlight. "This is a special drink," she said softly, her voice filled with an almost reverent tone. "It's a blessing for the bride. Drink it, and your bond with Michael will grow even stronger." Alana, touched by her mother's gesture, accepted the drink without hesitation. She had always trusted Mama Lani's wisdom and felt comforted by her presence. She lifted the vial to her lips and took a sip, feeling the warmth of the liquid slide down her throat. At first, it tasted sweet, with a hint of honey and herbs, but as the minutes passed, a strange sensation began to unfurl inside her. Her head grew heavy, and a sense of dizziness washed over her. It was as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted, and she was floating, disconnected from her body. Her vision blurred, and the once vibrant world around her became a spinning kaleidoscope of colors and shapes. Alana gasped, trying to steady herself, but her legs weakened, and the world tilted dangerously to the side. "Michael," she whispered, her voice barely a breath, but it was too late. As she reached out for him, her body crumpled like a wilted flower, and she collapsed into Michael's arms. Time seemed to slow as Michael caught her, his heart racing. His face, once radiant with joy, turned pale in an instant. He cried out her name, his voice trembling with panic. "Alana! Alana, stay with me!" Guests rushed to their sides, but the scene quickly descended into chaos. A doctor who had been attending the celebration hurried over, but even he seemed unsettled by the suddenness of Alana's collapse. Panic spread like wildfire through the crowd, whispers growing louder as they speculated what could have caused her to fall so unexpectedly. Some tried to comfort Michael, but he was fixated on his wife, desperately trying to rouse her from the unconsciousness that had overtaken her. "Get her to the hospital," one of the guests shouted, and Michael nodded, his face etched with fear. He cradled Alana's limp body in his arms as they rushed to the nearby hospital. His mind raced with questions. What had happened? Was it a sudden illness? Had something gone terribly wrong? His thoughts were consumed with worry, his hand clutching Alana's, praying that she would awaken, that she would be fine. The hospital, a humble building on the edge of Marula, was the center of the town's medical care. Alana was quickly taken inside, and Michael followed close behind, his breath ragged. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion and dread. But through it all, there was a single unwavering thought. He needed to protect her, to make sure she was safe. As Alana was placed on a bed, doctors and nurses swarmed around her, trying to assess her condition. Michael stood in the corner of the room, unable to do anything but wait, his heart hammering in his chest. He watched her face, hoping for a sign, a movement, anything that would tell him she was going to be okay. The room was filled with the quiet murmur of the medical staff, but Michael could hardly hear them over the deafening beat of his own pulse. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. Finally, Alana's eyelids fluttered, and a soft groan escaped her lips. Michael's breath caught in his throat, and he rushed to her side. "Alana, thank God," he whispered, his voice breaking. Her eyes opened slowly, and she blinked, confused. The dizziness still clouded her thoughts, but she recognized Michael's face, the worry etched there. She tried to speak, but her voice was weak, barely a whisper. What happened?" Michael gently took her hand, holding it as if he could will her strength back into her. "You collapsed, Alana? Do you remember anything?" Alana's brow furrowed as she tried to recall the events of the day. Her memory was foggy, but one detail stood out. The drink her mother had given her, the one that seemed to make everything spin. A chill ran down her spine, and a sense of unease washed over her. What was in that drink, and why did she feel so strange? The sterile, quiet walls of the hospital felt suffocating to Michael as he sat in the waiting area, his mind reeling. Every second seemed to stretch on forever, each tick of the clock a cruel reminder of how little he could do. His heart was heavy with dread as he paced back and forth, the sound of his shoes echoing in the empty hall. The room seemed to close in on him, filled with the weight of unanswered questions. What had happened to Alana? Why had she collapsed so suddenly, without warning? Was it something in the drink her mother had given her, or was it something more? Every possibility played through his mind like a never-ending loop, none of them offering any comfort. The people around him, friends and family, tried to offer him solace, but their words seemed hollow. How could anyone truly understand the depth of his pain? How could they possibly grasp what it felt like to watch the love of his life, his new wife, lie unconscious, fighting for her life? The hours stretched on, each passing minute like an eternity. Michael clung to the hope that Alana would wake up, that she would open her eyes and smile at him like she had on their wedding day, that the moment of fear and confusion would be a distant memory. But as time wore on, his hope began to wither, replaced by an unbearable sense of unease. The longer she remained unconscious, the more the fear of the worst crept into his heart. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, a doctor entered the waiting room, his face somber and grim. Michael's heart skipped a beat as he stood to meet him, his breath shallow, his hands trembling. The doctor didn't have to say a word. His expression alone told Michael everything he needed to know. "I'm so sorry," the doctor said quietly, his voice tinged with sorrow. "We did everything we could, but Alana didn't make it." For a long moment, Michael stood frozen, the weight of the words crashing over him like a wave. His mind went blank, and his body went numb. The world around him spun, and he struggled to stay upright as everything inside him seemed to crumble. The joyful day, the vows they had exchanged, the laughter of their friends and family, it all seemed so far away now, a distant memory, like a dream that had shattered beyond repair. She didn't make it?" Michael asked, his voice barely a whisper, his throat tight with disbelief. He wanted to scream, to deny it, to lash out at the cruel fate that had torn her from him. But the words stuck in his throat, heavy and impossible to say. The doctor nodded slowly, his eyes filled with sympathy. "I'm afraid so. We tried every treatment, but her body couldn't recover." Michael's legs gave way beneath him, and he collapsed into a nearby chair, his hands shaking as he pressed them to his face. The tears came, slow at first, then in a steady, uncontrollable stream. His heart ached with an intensity he had never known, and his mind refused to accept the truth. It couldn't be real. It couldn't be. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. They had just begun their life together. The wedding, the laughter, the vows they had made to one another. It all felt like it had happened moments ago. How could it have gone so wrong? How could the love of his life be taken from him so suddenly, so inexplicably? The weight of the loss pressed down on him, suffocating him, as if the very air had been stolen from his lungs. He could hardly breathe. The room around him seemed to blur, and all he could hear was the pounding of his own heart. In the midst of his grief, his thoughts spiraled back to their wedding day. He remembered the look in her eyes when they had exchanged vows, the way she had laughed as she danced with him under the sun, the joy and love that had radiated from her. How could that moment of pure happiness be followed by such tragedy? How could the woman who had been the light of his life be gone in the blink of an eye? He thought of their plans, the life they had dreamed of together, the future that had seemed so bright and full of promise. All of that had been ripped away from him. He had never imagined that his wedding day would end in sorrow, that he would leave the church without the woman he had just promised to love for the rest of his life. His body trembled as the reality of it all began to sink in. Alana was gone, his wife, his love, gone. The world felt colder, emptier, as if a part of him had been torn away, leaving only a hollow, aching void. His hands were still shaking as he wiped the tears from his eyes, but they were never ending, like an ocean that had opened up inside him. Behind him, he could hear the soft murmurs of his family and friends, their voices filled with sympathy. But they felt distant, as if he were standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down into a dark abyss. The grief was all-encompassing, and he couldn't escape it. Nothing could bring Alana back. He was alone. Through the haze of sorrow, Michael's mind began to race again. He had to know what had happened to her. Why had she collapsed? What had caused her sudden and inexplicable death? He couldn't accept that it was just a tragic accident. There had to be more to the story, something he was missing. The drink Mama Lonnie had given her, it was the only thing that stood out in his mind. Could it have been poisoned? Had someone hurt her intentionally? The questions burned in his mind, sharper than any pain he had ever felt. And as the reality of his loss settled in, so did the realization that this was far from over. Something darker was at play, something he hadn't seen, and he would stop at nothing to uncover the truth. As the night settled over the town, the quiet seemed to amplify the chaos in Michael's mind. He sat in the dim light of his hotel room, his thoughts racing, replaying every moment of the day. His wedding day. A day that was meant to be the happiest of his life had turned into a nightmare he couldn't escape. The image of Alana collapsing in his arms haunted him, the way she had looked so fragile and helpless. But what troubled him the most was the drink, the one her mother had given her. Michael had seen the moment clearly. Mama Lonnie handing Alana the small glass, her smile wide as she presented it as a special toast for her daughter. At the time, he thought nothing of it. But now, in the silence of his grief, that moment gnawed at him, twisting like a thorn deep inside his heart. Could it have been poisoned? Was there something wrong with the drink? Could someone have deliberately harmed her? The more he thought about it, the more the seed of doubt grew. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone, dialing Pastor Daniel's number. The man had always been a calm presence in his life, someone who had guided him through many of life's challenges. Michael hoped, desperately hoped, that Pastor Daniel would have some insight, some way to bring him peace, or at the very least, some clarity in the midst of this storm. Pastor Daniel answered on the first ring. "Michael, my son, I know this is a difficult time. What can I do for you?" Michael's voice cracked as he spoke. "Pastor, something's not right. I can't shake the feeling that something happened to Alana, the drink her mother gave her. I don't know, but I need to know what happened. I need to understand." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Michael could almost hear Pastor Daniel's heavy sigh, as if he, too, were carrying a weight too heavy to bear. "Come, my son," Pastor Daniel finally said. "You've been through much today, but I understand your need for answers. I'll accompany you to the hospital tomorrow. We'll go through Alana's medical report, see if we can uncover anything. Sometimes the truth is buried beneath layers of pain and confusion, but we'll search for it." The words were like a lifeline, a promise that he wasn't alone in this. Michael's heart swelled with gratitude, but it was quickly replaced by a renewed sense of urgency. He needed answers. He couldn't let Alana's death be in vain, especially if there was foul play involved. He had to know what happened, no matter what it took. The next morning, Michael barely slept, his mind racing with every possibility. He met Pastor Daniel early, and together they drove to the hospital. The familiar sterile smell of the building made Michael's stomach turn as they walked through the halls. He had never thought he would return here under such circumstances. The hospital, where he had been hoping for good news, now felt like the place where his worst nightmare had come true. They arrived at the medical records department, and Michael's hands were still shaking as they approached the receptionist. I need to see the medical report for my wife, Alana Matthews, he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. The receptionist glanced up, her eyes filled with sympathy, but she motioned for them to wait. Moments later, a nurse appeared with the file in hand, and Michael's heart sank. This was it, the moment he had been dreading. Pastor Daniel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder as they followed the nurse to a small conference room. It was windowless, cold, an appropriate setting for the unsettling task that lay ahead. As the nurse placed the file on the table and left them alone, Michael's mind raced again. What if there was nothing? What if the truth couldn't be found? Could he live with that? Pastor Daniel flipped open the folder and began reading the report. Michael leaned in, trying to focus, but his thoughts kept drifting to that moment at the wedding. Alana's radiant smile, the love in her eyes as they exchanged vows, and then the awful, sickening feeling when she had collapsed. He couldn't shake it. He couldn't let it go. Minutes passed, but they felt like hours. Finally, Pastor Daniel closed the report and looked up at Michael with a grim expression. "There's something strange here," he said, his voice low. The cause of Alana's collapse wasn't clear from the tests. Her vitals dropped suddenly, but they couldn't find a definitive explanation. They administered fluids and stimulants, but she never recovered. However, he paused, his fingers drumming on the file. There is something else. A trace of a foreign substance in her blood. It wasn't something they initially recognized, but it's consistent with a type of poison. Michael's heart dropped into his stomach, the blood draining from his face. Poison. It was real. His worst fears were confirmed. Poison? Michael whispered, his voice shaking. He had to hear it again. Are you sure? Pastor Daniel nodded, his brow furrowed. I'm no expert, Michael, but I've seen enough in my time to know that this is no accident. Someone deliberately poisoned your wife. The words hit Michael like a physical blow, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. The room seemed to spin as the realization set in. Someone had taken Alana from him, not by chance, not by fate, but by choice. Someone had murdered her. Who would do this? Michael's voice was hoarse with disbelief. Who would want to hurt her? Pastor Daniel placed the report down on the table and leaned in. We don't yet, Michael, but we will find out. You must stay strong. For Alana, for yourself. We'll get to the bottom of this. You have my word. As the weight of the discovery settled over him, Michael's grief morphed into something else. Something darker. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was a burning need for justice, for retribution. Someone had to pay for what had been done to Alana. And Michael wasn't going to stop until he found out who. With renewed determination, Michael stood up, his eyes hardening with resolve. We'll find them, Pastor. Whoever did this. I swear I won't rest until I know the truth. Pastor Daniel nodded, his expression serious. And I will be with you every step of the way. The search for answers had begun, and there was no turning back now. The silence of the sterile hospital room hung heavy in the air as Michael sat across from Pastor Daniel, the weight of the report still pressing down on his chest. The discovery that Alana had been poisoned was a blow so severe that, for a moment, Michael couldn't bring himself to think. The room seemed to narrow, the light flickering above him as his mind grappled with the horror of it all. Who would want to hurt Alana? Who could have done this on their wedding day? He couldn't fathom the answer, but one thing was certain now. Someone had deliberately taken her life. As the minutes passed, the door to the conference room opened, and a soft voice cut through the tension. It was Dr. Emma, who had treated Alana before her tragic passing. She entered with a stack of papers in hand, her face etched with concern. Michael's stomach twisted at the sight of her. His grief was still fresh, and yet, the thought of hearing more terrible news was almost too much to bear. Mr. Matthews, Pastor Daniel, Dr. Emma said, her voice calm but with an unmistakable note of urgency. I need to speak with you about what we've discovered regarding Mrs. Matthews. She placed the papers on the table between them. Michael's pulse quickened as he looked up at her. What have you found? He asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Dr. Emma hesitated for a moment before continuing, her eyes meeting his with an expression he couldn't read. We've completed a thorough review of Alana's medical records and tests. Initially, we couldn't pinpoint the cause of her collapse. However, after re-examining the results, we found traces of a substance in her bloodstream. a toxic substance. It's something we don't encounter often, but when we cross-referenced it with known poisons, we discovered it's consistent with a rare, fast-acting toxin. The substance causes the body's systems to shut down rapidly, affecting the heart and lungs. Unfortunately, by the time Alana was admitted, it was already too late to reverse the effects. Michael's mind raced. The word poison echoed in his ears, but it barely seemed real. He wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice, but all that came out was a shaky exhale. His hands clenched into fists, nails digging into his palms. Alana had been taken from him, not by some accident, not by fate, but by a cold, calculated act of malice. Who did this? Michael's voice was barely a whisper, hoarse with anguish. He looked to Dr. Emma, seeking answers in her eyes. Who would do this to my wife? Dr. Emma's gaze softened, but her expression remained serious. I wish I could tell you. Right now, all we have are the facts. The toxin was administered somehow, and it was fast-acting. That means it was likely a deliberate attempt to harm her, but beyond that, we don't have much to go on. She paused, as if weighing her next words carefully. It's clear to me that your wife's death wasn't an accident. Someone wanted her dead. Michael's heart shattered all over again, the weight of her words crushing him. Someone wanted her dead. He couldn't wrap his mind around it. Why? Why Alana? Pastor Daniel placed a steady hand on Michael's shoulder, his presence a small comfort amidst the storm of emotions inside him. This is just the beginning, Michael. We now know that Alana was murdered, but the question remains, who did this and why? Michael nodded, though the path ahead was unclear. He felt as though he was standing at the edge of a dark, endless tunnel, the light of truth too far away to see. But he couldn't stop now. He had to keep moving forward, for Alana, for the woman he had promised to love, honor, and protect. Thank you, Dr. Emma, Michael said quietly, though gratitude felt foreign in his mouth. He could barely manage a smile, but the doctor's kindness was not lost on him. We'll need to dig deeper. I won't stop until I know who did this. Dr. Emma nodded, offering a brief, sympathetic smile. I'll do what I can to help. If you need anything, let me know. As she left the room, Michael felt the familiar weight of despair creeping in once again. But there was no time to succumb to it. He had made a promise, to Alana, to himself, that he would uncover the truth, no matter what. He couldn't rest until justice was served. With Pastor Daniel by his side, Michael took a deep breath, steadying himself. We need to start asking questions. There's no way Alana's mother could have been unaware of what happened. She handed her the drink at, I don't know. I can't trust anyone right now. Pastor Daniel nodded solemnly. We must proceed carefully, Michael. There are things we don't yet understand. But trust will come later. For now, we have to focus on gathering the facts, not making accusations. But Michael was beyond caution. His heart burned with the need for answers. I can't wait, Pastor. Someone took her from me. I won't stop until I know who. The air in the room seemed to tighten as Michael's determination grew. He had crossed the point of no return. The world had taken Alana from him, and now he was going to take back the truth, whatever the cost. Pastor Daniel, ever the steady hand, gave Michael a firm nod. I understand. Let's go find the answers you need. And with that, the two of them left the hospital, walking into the unknown. There was no turning back. The search for justice had begun, and Michael would stop at nothing to see it through. The journey to Mama Lonnie's home felt like walking into the belly of the beast. Michael's heart pounded in his chest with each step, his thoughts swirling in a storm of anger and confusion. The weight of Alana's death was unbearable, and every breath he took felt like an intrusion on the life they had once shared. He wouldn't let her death go unanswered. With Pastor Daniel beside him, Michael approached the modest home of Alana's family, a place that once felt like a sanctuary, a place filled with laughter and warmth. Now, the house seemed distant, alien, and full of hidden secrets. Mama Lonnie had always been a motherly figure to him, an anchor in Alana's life. But now, as they crossed the threshold into her home, Michael's doubts grew like weeds in the cracks of his heart. Mama Lonnie sat on her favorite armchair, her face a mask of calm, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of tension when she saw the solemn expressions of the men before her. Kira, Alana's younger sister, sat on the couch, her eyes avoiding Michael's, hands folded neatly in her lap. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, each of them dancing in the space like a shadow that refused to leave. Michael, Pastor Daniel, Mama Lonnie greeted them, her voice as composed as always. It's good to see you. I wish it were under better circumstances. Please, sit. The tension was palpable as they sat across from the grieving family. Michael, his anger simmering just beneath the surface, wasted no time. Mama Lonnie, Kira, he began, his voice low but filled with an edge that hadn't been there before. I need to ask you something important. Alana, she was poisoned. I need to know if you have any idea who could have done this. The question hung in the air, stark and unforgiving. Mama Lonnie's gaze remained steady, but Kira shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting to her mother, then to Michael, before quickly falling back to her lap. Poisoned? Mama Lonnie's voice quivered just slightly, a perfect picture of shock, but her eyes remained calm, almost too calm. Oh, Michael, that's horrible. Who would want to hurt my daughter? You must be mistaken. Michael leaned forward, his gaze never leaving Mama Lonnie's face. I'm not mistaken. The doctors found traces of poison in her system. She was deliberately killed, and I have to know why. You were the one who gave her the drink that day, Mama Lonnie. What was it? Mama Lonnie's hand tightened around the armrest of her chair, her knuckles whitening. She didn't flinch, though. She didn't even blink. It was just a special drink, Michael. A family tradition. Nothing harmful. I don't understand why you'd think something like that could be dangerous. I loved Alana like my own daughter. Kira's voice broke through, shaky but defensive. We loved her, Michael. You have to believe that. We would never do anything to hurt her. But Michael wasn't buying it. His heart told him something was wrong, and every word they spoke only seemed to deepen his suspicions. Mama Lonnie's cool detachment, Kira's nervous energy, they were all signs that something was off. But what? He couldn't tell yet, but his instincts screamed at him to dig deeper. Did Alana ever mention anything to you about someone wanting to harm her? Michael pressed, the frustration and helplessness creeping into his tone. Did she have any enemies? Any reason why someone would want to poison her? Kira shook her head, her voice tight. No, Alana was loved by everyone. She had no enemies. You know that. Mama Lonnie's expression didn't change, but Michael caught the briefest flicker of something unreadable, pass across her face. It was subtle, but it was there, like a crack in an otherwise flawless facade. He leaned in closer, his voice firm. Mama Lonnie, he said, his words heavy with accusation. Did you know about the poison? Were you involved? The question hung in the air like a sharp blade, and for a moment the silence stretched on unbearably. The room felt smaller, more suffocating. Pastor Daniel, sensing the rising tension, gently placed a hand on Michael's arm, his voice soft but firm. Michael, we don't have the proof yet. We can't accuse anyone without it. We need to be careful in how we proceed, Pastor Daniel cautioned, his eyes meeting Michael's with a steady calm. But Michael could barely hear him. All he could focus on was Mama Lonnie's unwavering gaze, the slight tilt of her head, and the strange, calculating stillness in her demeanor. Why won't you answer me? Michael demanded, his voice trembling with the weight of his grief. Why are you acting like this isn't real? My wife is dead, and I have to know who took her from me. Mama Lonnie's eyes finally flickered, just for a moment, and then she spoke in a low, almost resigned tone. I loved Alana more than anything, Michael, but sometimes there are things in life you don't understand, things you can't control. You think you know someone, but sometimes you don't. Her words were cryptic, and Michael felt his stomach churn. They weren't the words of a mother grieving the loss of her daughter. They were words of someone hiding something dark and dangerous. Kira, sensing the shift in the air, stood up abruptly. That's enough, Michael, she shouted, her voice trembling with emotion. We loved her. Why are you accusing us like this? If you want answers, go somewhere else. The outburst startled Michael, and for a brief moment, he considered the possibility that Kira might know more than she was letting on. But Mama Lonnie remained calm, her face betraying nothing. With a final, quiet breath, Michael stood up, his eyes never leaving Mama Lonnie. I'm not done here. I will find the truth, no matter what it takes. Pastor Daniel stood alongside him, offering a reassuring hand on his back. We're not leaving without answers, Michael. We'll continue our investigation. Don't lose hope. As they left the house, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. There was something in Mama Lonnie's words, in her coldness, that gnawed at him, leaving him with a sense of dread he couldn't shake. The truth was out there. He could feel it, lurking just beneath the surface. And he would stop at nothing to bring it to light. The silence that followed their departure from Mama Lonnie's home felt suffocating, thick with the weight of unanswered questions. Michael's mind was a whirlpool of emotions, grief, confusion, and an unsettling sense that something sinister was at play. Every step he took with Pastor Daniel felt heavier, as if they were walking deeper into a mystery that neither of them fully understood. The streets of Marula, once so familiar and comforting, now seemed alien, as though a dark veil had fallen over the town. The bright colors of the market stalls, the laughter of children playing in the streets, everything felt distant. It was as if Marula itself had changed, revealing a side of itself Michael had never seen before. Pastor Daniel, walking beside him, finally broke the silence. His voice was low, careful, as though he were afraid someone might be listening. "Michael," he began, his eyes darting around before settling on him, "there are things about Alana's family, things you may not know." Michael's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" he asked, though he was afraid of the answer. Pastor Daniel hesitated, clearly weighing his words. The old man had never been one to speak in riddles, but now he seemed almost burdened by the words he had to say. "Over the years, there have been rumors," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whispers among the townsfolk, things people talk about when they think no one's listening. It's said that Mama Lonnie and Kira have been involved in dark practices. Witchcraft, Michael. Ancient rituals, curses, the kind of things that can bring a person power, but at a terrible cost." Michael felt the blood drain from his face. Witchcraft? This was something out of a story, a myth passed down through generations. But as Pastor Daniel spoke, the pieces began to fall into place. The strange coldness in Mama Lonnie's demeanor, the cryptic words she had spoken, the hidden look in her eyes, it all seemed to fit with the rumors. "But why?" Michael asked, his voice strained. "Why would they do this to Alana? She was their own flesh and blood." Pastor Daniel's eyes darkened, and he slowed his pace. "It's said that Mama Lonnie and Kira were never truly happy. There's a jealousy that runs deep, of Alana's beauty, her happiness, the life she built with you. Some say that it was that jealousy that drove them to dark places, where they thought they could control fate itself. You see, Michael, people like them. They don't believe in fate the way we do. They believe they can change it, manipulate it, even destroy it if it stands in their way." A chill ran down Michael's spine as he listened. The idea that Alana's own family, the people she had loved and trusted, could have been so consumed by envy and desire for power, it was more than he could comprehend. But as absurd as it sounded, the possibility of witchcraft, of a hidden world of dark rituals, was beginning to seem more and more real. "We need to find proof," Michael said, his voice filled with determination. "We need to understand what really happened." Pastor Daniel nodded, though the concern in his eyes was unmistakable. "Yes, but we must be careful. The things we're talking about, these aren't rumors that can be easily dismissed. If there's any truth to what people are saying about Mama Lonnie and Kira, we could be walking into something much more dangerous than we realize." Michael felt a wave of frustration and anger surge through him. "I don't care how dangerous it is," he said fiercely. "I need to know the truth for Alana." The pastor's eyes softened, a faint sigh escaping his lips. "I understand, Michael. But we can't just rush in blindly. There are others who may be involved, people who've stayed silent for a long time. We need to tread carefully, because whatever power they think they hold, it's not something we can just undo." As the two men walked through the streets of Marula, Michael's thoughts raced. The town, which had once felt so peaceful, now seemed like a maze of secrets. The more he learned about Alana's family, the more he began to question everything he thought he knew about her life. Suddenly, his mind flashed back to the wedding day, to that moment when Alana had taken the drink from Mama Lonnie's hands. The dizziness, the confusion in her eyes, it had all happened so quickly. What had been in that drink? Was it part of some ancient ritual, a poison designed to weaken her, to bring her to the brink of death? And if so, what did they want from her? What could they possibly gain from taking her life? I've heard stories, Pastor Daniel continued, snapping Michael out of his thoughts, of people who've seen things, strange things happening around Mama Lonnie's house. Animals acting strangely, strange markings on the walls, rituals performed in the dead of night. Some even claim to have seen shadows moving where there should be none. Michael's mind was reeling. Shadows? Markings? These were no longer just rumors. They were signs of something far darker. And it wasn't just Alana's life that had been taken. It was as though the very fabric of Marula was being slowly consumed by a hidden force, one that was pulling the strings behind the scenes. "We need to speak to more people," Michael said, a sense of urgency in his voice. "I want to know everything. The town, the stories, the rituals, everything." Pastor Daniel hesitated but nodded. "I'll reach out to a few old friends, people who might know something more. But remember, Michael, this is dangerous territory. If what we're dealing with is true..." Michael's eyes darkened with resolve. "I don't care how dangerous it is. I won't stop until I find the truth." And so, with the shadow of Marula's dark past hanging over them, Michael and Pastor Daniel made a pact. They would uncover the secrets of the town, no matter the cost. The truth about Alana's death was out there, buried beneath layers of lies, deceit, and ancient power. And Michael was prepared to do whatever it took to bring it to the light. The following morning, Michael and Pastor Daniel set out to meet someone they hoped would provide the crucial answers they needed. Elder Mosi, an ancient figure in Marula, was known not just for his age, but for his deep understanding of the town's history and its people. He was one of the few who remembered the old ways and had seen the darker side of Marula that many preferred to forget. The air was heavy with tension as they walked through the narrow, winding streets, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The town felt different today, more oppressive, as if even the walls themselves were holding their breath. Michael's mind raced, each thought more frantic than the last. Could there be more to Alana's death than just a betrayal by her family? Could there be forces beyond what he understood, forces older and more powerful than anything he could fight? As they approached Elder Mosi's house, a small, weathered hut on the outskirts of the town, Michael couldn't help but feel a shiver run down his spine. The place was isolated, hidden from the bustling life of the marketplace, and the air surrounding it felt thick, as though secrets were stored in every stone and tree nearby. Elder Mosi was waiting for them outside, his stooped figure framed by the door, his face lined with age and wisdom. His eyes, however, were sharp and alert, betraying a mind that had seen far more than most could ever imagine. He gestured for them to sit, and once they had, he fixed his gaze on Michael with an intensity that made him feel as though his very soul were being examined. "You seek answers," Elder Mosi said, his voice low and measured. "And in this town, there are answers to be found. But you must be careful, Michael. The truth here is not something easily uncovered. It is not simply a matter of facts and evidence. It is woven into the very fabric of Marula itself." Michael leaned forward, his determination burning through his grief. "I need to know what happened to Alana," he said, his voice firm. "I believe her death wasn't an accident. Someone did this to her. I have to find out who." Elder Mosi nodded slowly, his weathered face unreadable. He paused for a long moment, as if weighing whether to share the knowledge that had been passed down to him through the generations. Finally, he spoke. "Mama Lonnie and Kira are not who they seem, Michael," he said quietly. "They come from a long line of people who have practiced what some would call witchcraft, others would call dark magic. But it is not just magic. No, there is a deeper power at play here. They have ties to forces that most cannot even comprehend, forces that have shaped Marula for centuries." Michael's heart skipped a beat. He had heard the rumors, of course, but hearing them spoken aloud by Elder Mosi brought a terrible clarity to the situation. Mama Lonnie and Q women, who had appeared so ordinary, were part of something far darker, something that stretched back through the very history of Marula. "What do you mean? Forces that most can't comprehend?" Michael asked, his voice tight with unease. "What are they involved in?" Elder Mosi sighed deeply, and for the first time, Michael saw a flicker of something like fear in his eyes. "They are part of an ancient tradition, Michael," he explained. "A tradition that binds them to powers beyond the physical realm. They believe they can control fate itself, bend the laws of nature to their will. But there is always a price for such power." Pastor Daniel, who had been silent until now, spoke up. And that price, what is it? Elder Mosey met his gaze, his expression grave. It is always a soul, a life to feed the forces they summon. The words hung in the air like a weight, suffocating Michael with their finality. A soul for a soul, a life for a life. The thought twisted inside him, gnawing at his insides. Alana, his beloved Alana, had been the price. They've been doing this for generations, Elder Mosey continued, his voice taking on a more urgent tone. It is said that Mama Lonnie and Kira have made deals with dark spirits, drawing power from them in exchange for sacrifices. They never act alone. They have allies in the shadows, people who protect them, people who benefit from the power they wield. They are not untouchable, but they are dangerous. Michael's mind reeled. How could it be possible? The idea that Alana's own family could have sacrificed her for some ancient ritual, some unholy pact. He couldn't accept it. But the pieces were all falling into place, and the terrifying truth was becoming undeniable. What can we do? Michael asked, his voice raw with a mixture of disbelief and rage. How do we stop them? Elder Mosey looked at him with a solemn gaze. You cannot confront them directly, Michael, not without consequences. They are protected by ancient powers, and anyone who tries to expose them risks losing more than just their life. There are forces in this town, hidden in plain sight, that will protect them. People you trust, people who wear masks to hide their true faces. If you push too hard, they will push back. Harder. Michael clenched his fists, the anger inside him bubbling over. I don't care about the danger, he said fiercely. I will stop them. I will make them pay for what they've done to Alana. Elder Mosey's expression softened slightly, but there was an undeniable sadness in his eyes. I admire your resolve, Michael, but you must be cautious. If you truly wish to uncover the truth and put an end to this, you will need more than just courage. You will need knowledge. Knowledge of their rituals, of their allies, of the things that bind them. And that knowledge can only be found in the old ways. You must seek out the ancient texts, the scrolls that tell the true history of Marula. Only then will you understand the full extent of what you are dealing with. Michael nodded, his heart pounding with determination. He would do whatever it took to find those texts, to learn everything he needed to confront Mama Lonnie and Kira. He couldn't let Alana's death be in vain. He couldn't let them get away with this. We'll find them, he said resolutely. We'll find the answers, no matter where they lead us. Elder Mosey placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, his grip surprisingly firm for someone so frail. Remember, Michael, he said softly, there is always a price to be paid when dealing with such dark forces. The question is not whether you will find the truth, but whether you will be able to live with it. With those final words, Elder Mosey rose slowly, signaling that their time together was over. But Michael didn't need more words. He had everything he needed. The truth was within his grasp, and nothing, not even the most ancient of powers, would stop him from uncovering it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village, Michael and Pastor Daniel stood at the edge of the forest, preparing for the most dangerous part of their journey. The air was thick with tension, and every step they took toward Mama Lonnie's home felt heavier than the last. Elder Mosey had given them his warning, and though it weighed on their minds, there was no turning back now. Alana's death had to be avenged. And her family, these women who had once seemed so normal, so harmless, would not escape the consequences of their dark deeds. With them were a few trusted friends. Kofi, a local who had once been a childhood friend of Alana's, and who had witnessed strange rituals in the woods. He had seen Mama Lonnie and Kira perform rites in secret, offerings to gods or spirits Michael couldn't comprehend. His testimony was crucial, but it was also dangerous. None of them could be sure of the forces they were up against, and the risks were becoming clearer by the day. As they approached Mama Lonnie's home, a heavy silence hung over the group. The house loomed in front of them, an eerie figure against the fading twilight. The wooden structure seemed to exhale an ancient chill, its windows dark and uninviting. Michael felt a knot tighten in his chest. This place had once been a symbol of family and warmth, but now it felt like the very heart of darkness. Pastor Daniel looked at Michael, his face etched with determination. "We do this together," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the danger they all faced. "For Alana." Michael nodded, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He glanced at Kofi, whose eyes were wide with the same uncertainty, but also the same resolve. They had come this far. Now they had to face whatever lay within. As they reached the door, Michael stepped forward and knocked, his heart pounding. The door creaked open slowly, revealing Mama Lani standing in the doorway, her face cold and unreadable. Her dark eyes locked onto Michael's, and for a moment there was a flicker of something almost predatory in her gaze. "Ah, Michael," Mama Lani said, her voice smooth but carrying an undercurrent of something darker. "I wondered when you would come. I trust you've come for the answers you seek?" Behind her, Kira appeared, her expression a perfect mask of innocence. But there was an unmistakable glint in her eyes. Michael felt the weight of their gaze as they surveyed him and his friends, sizing them up. "We have enough evidence," Pastor Daniel said, stepping forward. His voice was calm, but there was a fierce strength to it, one that only came from knowing that the truth was on his side. "Kofi has witnessed your rituals, Mama Lani. We know about the sacrifices, the poison you gave Alana, and the dark powers you've been using to control this town." Mama Lani's lips curled into a sinister smile. "Oh, how quaint," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "You think you understand? You think your little accusations can harm me or my daughter?" She glanced at Kira, who smirked in silent agreement. "You are far too late, Michael. Far too late to stop what has already been set in motion." Michael's blood ran cold. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. They were not just trying to protect a secret. They had planned this. This wasn't just a mistake. This was deliberate. The death of Alana had been part of something far larger than he could have ever imagined. "You killed her," Michael said, his voice trembling with rage, but he held his ground. "You killed Alana to feed your power, to feed your greed." Mama Lani's smile never wavered. "Greed?" she repeated, as though the word were foreign to her. "No, Michael. It's not greed. It's survival. Do you really think you can challenge the forces we've controlled for generations? We are not just a family, Michael. We are part of something much greater than you can fathom." Kira stepped forward, her expression darkening. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it carried an edge of undeniable menace. "This power? It's in our blood. It's in our history. You think you can just walk in and tear it all down? The town, the people here, they are ours. We've kept them safe, Michael. We've protected them from things they can't even imagine. And you? You think you can destroy it all with a few questions?" Pastor Daniel raised his voice, his faith unwavering. "The truth will come to light," he declared. "You cannot hide from what you've done. What you've done to Alana will not go unpunished." Mama Lani laughed, a sound that made the hairs on the back of Michael's neck stand on end. It was a laugh that held no joy, only a chilling, mocking sense of superiority. "Punished?" she scoffed. "What can you possibly do? You think you can stop us? You think that because you know a little about our rituals, you can undo centuries of power? We have friends in high places, Michael, allies who will protect us, no matter what you do." At those words, Michael felt a cold dread wash over him. The enormity of what he was up against began to sink in. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. This was a battle against forces that had been entrenched in Marula for centuries, forces that had influenced the very fabric of the town's existence. But Michael wasn't ready to back down. He couldn't. Not now. Not when Alana's death was still fresh in his heart, and the truth had to come out. "You're wrong," Michael said, his voice gaining strength. "The truth will come out, and when it does, there will be nowhere for you to hide." Mama Lani's smile faltered for a moment, her eyes narrowing with a trace of anger. "We'll see about that, won't we?" she hissed. With that, the door slammed shut, and the group was left standing in the darkened street, the weight of their confrontation hanging heavy in the air. The battle was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The heavy silence that followed the door's violent slam was almost unbearable, a thick tension hanging between Michael and his friends. But as they stood there in the dimming light, the atmosphere shifted. Pastor Daniel, though weary, remained resolute. His voice, quiet at first, began to rise with each word he spoke, invoking the power of faith and justice. He began to pray aloud, his words steady but powerful as they filled the cold air. "Lord, we come before you, seeking your strength, your truth, your light. In the face of darkness, we stand together for the life of our sister Alana, for the soul she was and still is, in your eternal grace. We ask for your justice. We ask for your protection from the evil that tries to consume us. As the prayer continued, something shifted in the very air around them. The wind seemed to hold its breath, and the ground beneath their feet felt charged, as if the earth itself had acknowledged the words spoken. Michael's heart pounded in his chest, a strange mix of fear and hope filling him. The tension that had clung to his body from the moment they had arrived at Mama Lonnie's house seemed to dissipate, replaced by a profound sense of peace. But then, an unexpected change took place. Michael watched in stunned silence as Mama Lonnie and Kira, standing motionless just moments ago, suddenly staggered. They collapsed to the floor, their bodies twisting and jerking in agonizing movements, as if some unseen force were striking them. The two women writhed on the ground, their faces contorted in terror and pain. A guttural sound, almost inhuman, escaped from Mama Lonnie's lips, and Kira's screams echoed through the room. It was as if the very power they had used to control the town, to poison Alana, was now turning back on them. The room seemed to pulse with an energy that Michael couldn't understand, but knew in his heart was a sign of divine justice at work. The weight of centuries of darkness, built on deceit and dark rituals, was being lifted, broken by the truth and by the unwavering faith that had brought him here. He stood frozen for a moment, his breath catching in his throat, as the two women struggled against forces they could not see, as if being punished for their actions in a way that felt beyond mortal comprehension. Pastor Daniel continued his prayer, his voice unwavering, now filled with a renewed intensity. By the power of truth, we stand firm, Lord. Let your justice prevail, and let those who have wronged your children know that their deeds will not go unpunished. The room fell silent again, the echoes of Kira's and Mama Lonnie's frantic movements fading into a stunned quiet. Michael's heart hammered in his chest as he watched the women on the floor, struggling to breathe, their eyes wide with fear. It was as though the very weight of their guilt was suffocating them. And with each passing second, the power they had wielded for so long seemed to slip further away. Finally, Mama Lonnie and Kira stilled, their bodies falling limp on the floor, their breaths shallow but still alive. The stillness that settled over the room was more than just the absence of sound. It was the heavy, profound silence that followed the defeat of something ancient and dark. It was the moment when justice, in its purest form, had arrived. Michael exhaled a long breath, the tension draining from his body. The overwhelming sense of peace that followed the storm of chaos was so complete that it felt almost tangible. For the first time in days, the heavy grief that had burdened his heart seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet certainty. Alana's memory, her life, had been honored. The truth had prevailed. Pastor Daniel stood silently for a moment, his head bowed in prayer. When he finally looked up, his eyes met Michael's with a knowing gaze. There were no words that could explain the magnitude of what had just transpired, no words that could ease the pain or restore what had been lost. But there was a quiet assurance in Pastor Daniel's expression, a confirmation that this was the justice Alana had deserved. "We've done what we came here to do, Michael," Pastor Daniel said, his voice softer now, tinged with compassion. "Alana's spirit is free. Her soul has been heard, and you—" "I know," Michael whispered, his voice breaking as he looked down at the women who had caused so much suffering. "I know. I never imagined it would end like this, that she would be gone, and I would have to face all of this alone." "You're not alone," Pastor Daniel replied gently, his hand on Michael's shoulder. "You never were. We're here for you. And now, so is the truth." The weight of those words hung in the air, a balm to Michael's broken heart. The truth had come to light, and with it, a small glimmer of hope for what lay ahead. The road would still be long, and the scars of loss would take time to heal, but now Michael knew he wasn't facing it alone. His community stood with him, Pastor Daniel, Elder Mosey, and even Kofi. Together, they were stronger than the darkness that had tried to tear them apart. As they left Mama Lonnie's home that night, Michael felt a quiet resolve within him. The truth had been exposed, and justice had been done. Alana's death, while tragic, had not been in vain. Through his grief and the unbearable pain of losing her, Michael had found his purpose: to protect the legacy she had left behind, to make sure that no one else would ever suffer as she had. The village of Marula, too, would heal. It would take time, but the shadow of fear and secrecy would no longer control its people. Michael had stood against the darkness, and in doing so, he had become a beacon of light for those who had been silenced for far too long. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Michael knew that with the strength of his community and the love he still carried for Alana, he would move forward. With every step, he would honor her memory, until, one day, the pain would fade, and in its place, only the bright light of justice would remain. As Michael stood beneath the vast night sky, a deep sense of peace began to wash over him. The storm of grief and anger had subsided, and in its place, a quiet understanding settled in his heart. Alana's memory would live on, not in sorrow, but in the justice that had finally been served. The darkness that had threatened to tear Marula apart was now gone, and with it, a new dawn was rising for the village. Michael had fought for the truth, not just for himself, but for Alana, for the love they had shared and the life they were supposed to build together. And though the pain of her loss would never fully fade, he knew that her spirit would guide him as he moved forward, ready to embrace the future with strength and courage. The village of Marula would heal, just as Michael had. He walked away from the shadows, knowing that the light of justice had triumphed, and the truth had finally come to light. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video, and don't forget to subscribe for more gripping tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Share with your friends and loved ones to spread the message of hope and justice. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please comment below with your reactions or any questions you might have. Your support means everything to us, and we can't wait to connect with you again soon. Until then, remember, no darkness is too deep to be overcome, and justice always finds its way.